Welcome to this episode of the Founders Fireside Podcast. Today, I'm here with Izzy Branam, the CEO of RelateXR. Izzy, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here.
So tell us about RelateXR.
RelateXR is a immersive therapeutic for substance use disorders. So we're using the power of virtual reality to deliver something that's never been possible before, which is ultimately time travel.
Okay, so you help people with VR and AR break addictions. What does it actually look like if I was using a RelateXR program?
So we do a face scan and a voice clone. We make a virtual avatar of you. Functionally, it's a video game character of you that looks like you and speaks to you in your very voice. And you get to time travel 15 years into the future, meet a version of your future 15 years in the future of continued addiction, and another 15 years in recovery.
Wow, that seems like it would be a useful experience for going through addiction. Why did you start it, and when did you start it?
So I technically didn't start it. I would probably just be more classified as just a CEO. But this is spun out of some research from the IU School of Medicine by Dr. Oberlin and Andrew Nelson. And the two of them had been working on this for a couple years, had done a really exciting pilot study that showed some great preliminary outcomes or great outcomes just on a small scale. And they said, man, let's figure out what this looks like to commercialize it. And so I was brought in to help them just flush out a commercialization plan and build the first iteration of a pitch deck and, just kind of work out a couple ideas on what it looks like to bring this to market. And then that grew into a more permanent role and then eventually into the CEO capacity.
Sweet. I always was curious about leasing IP from IU. What does that look like, and do they have any restrictions to leasing the IP?
Just about any university has a tech transfer office. They call them different things, but this is the office that's in charge of taking all of the incredible research and intellectual property that comes out of the university and then says, how are we going to deploy this IP so that we can impact the world and see this come to a place that actually drives impact and isn't just sitting on a shelf or done in a laboratory, but actually impacts everyday people in everyday life. And so the tech transfer office's job is to say, what does that look like? How are we gonna find the right partner to bring it to fruition? And then they work out a royalty deal, so it's mutually beneficial and everybody's interests are aligned. So the university and the licensee both win and share some of the profits and residuals of the IP.
Yeah. Okay. If I'm correct, are you going through trials right now with patients?
Yeah.
And how have those studies turned out?
So we did a pilot study or a feasibility study. This is just a really small test. This was 21 subjects to just see, does this work and can we actually pull it off? And so we were able to pull it off. We published that data. We saw an 86% 30-day abstinence rate. This was not a trial with a control group, so I can't make claims on the difference between that and traditional treatment. But generally, you see anywhere from 40 to 90% of people relapse within the yearly treatment. So 86% abstinence is pretty promising, and so that was enough for us to get some money from the NIH to go do wider clinical trials with really appropriate placebo control group. That's actually a placebo VR experience where we've isolated for the future self, and then you get to actually see, is this working versus treatment as usual. And so that's what we're doing now. We have 3 ongoing trials, and pretty exciting.
That's super exciting. How many people are in these trials?
It changes every day, so I don't know that I can give you like a definitive answer, but I think we're probably in the ballpark of probably over 100 lives impacted by the technology.
Incredible. So is the trials that you're doing, are they being run through the FDA or the NIH?
So the NIH is a funding the NIH is an organization that funds research. The FDA is an organization that regulates devices. So they have two different functions. The NIH funds research. The FDA wants to then take that research and look at it to determine if the device, or in our case, this Relate XR product, is safe and effective. And so they serve two different functions, but they are aligned in the fact that they're both part of the pipeline to bring new devices to market.
Okay. So the NIH helps you with funding, and then the FDA approves the results and makes sure that it's a good product.
From a really high level, yeah.
Okay. I was curious, why does something like Relate XR have to go through the FDA when it's not a food or a drug?
The FDA regulates devices as well, and it's not in the name, but we believe that this has promise to be a really clinically effective device to treat substance use, which is a medical condition per the DSM-5. And so since we're treating a medical condition in a clinical setting, we have to get FDA clearance as a medical device. So it all comes back down to the claims that you make, and ultimately we want to make claims about reducing use.
Right. It's really important. So you feel like the best way is to get this thing pumped through the FDA, because otherwise, is Relate XR an app that someone could, or a program that someone could download onto their Oculus?
The product is a combination of hardware and software that works together seamlessly to provide this therapeutic effect. And so if you have just the software without the hardware, you're not getting the effect. If you have just the hardware without the software, you're not getting the effect. And so this is an intertwined product where you couldn't just download this on the Oculus store. This is something we envision being a prescription that you get from a clinician, and they prescribe it the same way that they would prescribe you a pharmaceutical. It's
Wow.
just a medical device. And so that's the pathway that we think makes most sense.
So it's its own hardware.
It's built on off-the-shelf technology, but it's customized for our use case. And so it's somewhere in between, but it is proprietary.
Is there anything besides the headset itself for the hardware?
Yeah, think about that. The hardware is just the headset and the remotes.
Okay. And do the remotes look like other VR system remotes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That is so interesting. So I understand you received this money from the NIH. Have you done any other forms of funding?
No dilutive money. It's all just been research grants to fund the trials.
Okay. And because you're trying to get this approved as a proper treatment for rehab for people that want to break addictions, what does the revenue model kind of look like?
The vision is that this is a prescription digital therapeutic, a medical device that's prescribed, and whether that's paid for by the user in a cash pay situation or the patient in a cash pay situation, or this is paid for by a payer, whether that be an insurance company or employee benefit plan or whatever that is. So that's yet to be determined where the actual funding source comes from, but it's just a traditional medical device model.
Okay. You hear a lot about healthcare companies and insurance companies kind of denying claims. Obviously, there was that big scandal with the CEO of United Healthcare. people are kind of fed up with insurance companies in certain cases where they deny claims. Do you think that insurance companies will be willing to pay for something like this for a patient?
It really comes down to the data that we provide in the case that we make, that this provides better treatment and ultimately saves the insurance networks money. And that's yet to be determined. It all comes down to the outcomes of the data that I don't have yet. But that's the hope, right? Like, I want to make sure that I can get this in the hands of every person who needs it, despite their income, despite their socioeconomic status. I want to make sure that this is available to the people who need it most, everything else aside. And that really only happens when you have access through Medicare, Medicaid, when you have access through health insurance, when you have access through whatever that is. And you have to make sure that there's a pathway to getting this prescribed too. And so that those are all pieces of the puzzle that need to get worked out, but ones that don't really start to come into play until the FDA clearance piece happens. And then that's kind of the next stage of trying to build a compelling case with the evidence that we have that this is something that needs to be in the hands of everybody.
Right. Okay, so providing access through the proper channels is important. How are the patients receiving this? Because personally, I might be a little skeptical of a rehab treatment with XR.
I think it depends on the patient. Different people are going to receive it well. Some people have never used VR. Some people have. Some people use it all the time, right? So it really depends. But at the end of the day, I think, I just keep saying it, but it comes back to the data. And if we are able to point to really robust evidence that this provides better outcomes in the people who don't use it, then it's kind of a no-brainer, right? It's like,
right.
It might be weird to put on a VR headset, but if it works, it works. So that's really the place that we're really fighting to get to right now, because a lot of those obstacles are much easier to overcome when you can point to evidence that what you're doing works.
Right. So it's not absolutely proven yet, but so far it sounds effective. As you mentioned, 86% abstinence with the initial small trial that you ran. I wanted to ask you this. Have you heard of a government program called Brave Mind?
Yeah, Palmer Luckey worked on that, and it was a military project, I believe, I think probably like the 90s or early 2000s, is that right?
Yeah. But yeah, it was treating veterans with PTSD using virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of seems like there are maybe some parallels there.
There's a full circle there too, and because Palmer Luckey, who designed and invented Oculus, worked on that project, and that was part of the inspiration for building Oculus, which then became MetaQuest, which then became the most widely used VR headset, and what makes you and I familiar with and have access to this technology that we never had before. So
right.
We have a lot to thank to Brave Mind and other military VR projects like it. It's pretty cool.
Totally. And kind of paved the way.
Yeah, it's also full circle too, because Palmer Luckey has working on a new augmented reality headset for soldiers on the battlefield.
Really? Through Anduril?
Yep.
Wow.
I think he took the contract over from Microsoft, if I remember right.
Huh. Awesome.
I think Palmer Luckey is one of the more interesting founders. I find him super, super fascinating, and I think he's a great operator.
He's a great operator. I want to get back to Relate XR. If I remember correctly, you're a common contestant at pitch competitions. Did you go to that one in Boston?
Yeah, it was a hackathon.
Okay.
That one was. But yeah, I love doing pitch competitions. They're fun. It's like it's a fun challenge, and you get to meet really cool people. And it's been something I've been doing for a couple of years. I think I did my first one when I was maybe 15 or 16.
Okay. And have you been doing a lot of pitch competitions for Relate XR?
Not as much, just because I think we have bigger fish to fry a lot of the time. But there's certain ones that are worth our time. They're a lot of work, and they're a lot of practice, and it's a lot of effort. And sometimes it doesn't pan out, and there's not an outcome. And so you kind of have to do this like cost benefit analysis on your time to see if it's worth.
Right.
But some of them definitely are worth it.
Okay. Gotta set your priorities, and it seems like that's getting Relate XR to the point where it's approved by the FDA. Is that what's the main goal that you're working towards with Relate XR?
I mean, the main goal is impacting a lot of lives, right? And impacting the lives of people who are thus impacted, and the families of the people around them. That's the main goal. To achieve said goal, we would need FDA clearance, which I think is where you're going, and that takes some evidence that we need to get, and obviously it takes money to fund that research. So it all comes back to like funding sources, and pitch competitions can be one of those.
Okay. So you mentioned there are 3 trials going on right now. Who makes those trials happen? Because obviously it takes money to do those trials. Who's executing the studies? That's
Dr. Oberlin and Andrew Nelson, my 2 partners. They are running the trials now. They and the lab at the IH School of Medicine is running these trials and facilitating the intake and the actual deployment of the paradigm that is the trial and what's being tested. There's another facility on the West Coast that's also using it as a remote testing site. It's like a multi-site. But I don't touch the clinical piece. I'm just working on bringing it to market.
Okay. You mentioned that the main side of the business that you work on is bringing it to market. What does that look like in your day-to-day?
Right now, it's working on some stuff for the FDA. I'm trying to get all of our ducks in a row there for submissions. Also, just talking to prospective users and doing interviews with clinicians across the country and asking them about their experience and their excitement and hesitations around technology like this. And then just telling the story and working with people to make sure that it's known and there's excitement around it.
Okay. That's really interesting. These clinicians that you're talking to, what are they excited about and what are their hesitations?
A lot of them are just excited that there's movement in the space. Substance use has had, frankly, like relatively limited innovation for a long time. It's been the same status quo, and frankly, a lot of times for a lot of people, it just doesn't work that well. Relapse rates can be as high as 90% in the first year of leaving treatment. And so that's unfortunate, and something needs to change to help us help more people, right? And I think clinicians are just excited that there's movement there. There's some hesitations about the, how are people comfortable using these headsets? Are they familiar with how to navigate the headsets and all the things like that, which can be addressed over time. But I think generally people are excited that people are hungry for evidence-based treatment that's new and works.
Right. That's a good point about new users maybe not knowing how to navigate, and you got to figure out, can people figure out how to use this XR system? Relate XR, I feel like one of their excitements about it is that it's a non-drug rehab treatment, where a lot of rehab treatments that are out there, they could be something like methadone, and it's a lot better than heroin, but it's still another substance. Does that also make it harder for it to be effective because it's a non-drug rehab treatment?
I think the most honest answer is that it's both to get the best outcomes, probably, right? Mm-hmm. I can't speak for sure, but my guess is that you need a whole toolbox full of tools to solve such a big and challenging problem as substance use. And if we can be one more tool in the toolbox that helps the outcomes in conjunction with a lot of other ones, I don't think that at all we should be or would be replacing any of these treatments, but adding one more layer of support on top. And so, you still should go to your recovery group, and you still should go to this, that, and the other, and you should take your drugs if you're prescribed them. But then, do this on top. It's just one more tool.
Okay. So it's more of a boost than a replacement.
Yeah, it's an adjunctive treatment, right? Like we're not trying to say that put this headset on and you'll be good. Like that's just I think that would be foolish and naive to say, and that's not at all where we envision this being positioned. I think this is one more tool in the toolbox, and providing people with every chance that they can have, right?
Totally. So one of the questions I had on here was motivation. What is your motivation for working on Relate XR and bringing this thing to market?
Yeah, I truly don't think that I could come up with a more impactful or necessary problem that needs to be solved in my lifetime. And if I can be a small piece just to have a little fingerprint on helping somebody, even just one person, I can play the tape forward on the ripple effect of that and the legacy of that work. And if we impact one life, it's worth it. And that's what it comes down to for me, right? Like if I can provide someone with just enough support that they need to to get to the place that they want and achieve the goals that they want and start a family and live the life they want, their kids will grow up in a household that is maybe healthier than it otherwise would have been. And the ripple effect and the ripple of impact of that is infinite, right? I could never quantify that impact, and that's a legacy, right? Like even for one person, that's a legacy that will span like generations upon generations. It's an infinite impact. And so that's what gets me excited, is like you can play the tape forward on the way that this provides real change in real people's lives and real families. And frankly, like if I were building an AI agent for accounting, right? Like it's like I can't probably make that same justification. And it makes it harder to really like put your head down every day and work on this problem when deep down, it might be like generating money, but like is it really creating a ripple of impact? And for a lot of people, what they're working on is probably no. And there's big, challenging, hairy problems in the world that need to be solved. And who better to solve them than people, who see problems differently, right? Like there needs to be new solutions to old problems, and probably new minds are going to be the ones that help to make that happen.
I love that. That is such a great answer, because I tell you every time I see you in the space that you're working on the coolest business because it's something that's really helping people. But that point about the ripple effect, having a whole ripple effect of generations and generations that benefit because of it, and all of society around it. We would be a lot better if less people were addicted. It's a real impact that something like this can have. Tell me about networking. How did you meet Dr. Oberlin and Dr. Nelson?
It ultimately came really naturally. I don't really actually know how to answer that question.
How much money have you raised in total for Relate XR?
I probably don't want to answer that definitively, just because it's hard to quantify exact number. But like some of it goes to like the lab, and some of it goes to the company, but it all funds the same research. If that makes sense.
Right. So Dr. Oberlin and Dr. Nelson are the ones that are actually carrying out the trials.
and the Oberlin lab.
Okay. Is that the name of his lab?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is kind of a question about sort of getting FDA approval in general. I trust Dr. Oberlin and Dr. Andrew Nelson to run the study on their own. But what about sort of, like, you hear this stat, it's so good that Relate XR is a non-drug treatment, but you hear a stat about 30-something% of FDA drugs that get approved end up being recalled. Is there any fear towards letting the organizations that are promoting the drug do the studies themselves?
Yeah, and I'm actually, I have not heard that particular statistic, but I think there are so many safeguards in place around this research. I mean, you have to get IRB approval. For us, we're doing it in the School of Medicine, which there's all sorts of safeguards there. You have to have a quality management system in place, which is another safeguard in and of itself. And so there's a lot of safeguards in place to ensure. And the FDA, you know, they're not dumb. Like, they're good at what they do, and they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for a long time. The reality is, it's just like things are going to happen. And like, you know, it's hard to, and the recalls are frankly like a good thing that they're happening versus nothing ever being recalled, right? Like that's probably even worse. So it's just good part point. Of the system.
Yeah. So they're running 3 trials right now. How long do you imagine the process taking before you can bring it to market?
We're hoping to get FDA clearance within the next, 2 years or so, 2 to 3 years. It depends on how quickly we can do these trials and what that looks like. It's going to be up in the air to some degree, and it also depends on how long this review process takes, depending on the complexity and novelty of the idea and the approach, and if there's been anything submitted like this before, and whether you do what's called a 510K, which means you have a predicate device that you're kind of piggybacking on, or you do a de novo, which says this is completely new. Those have different timelines for the FDA to review them, and they may take longer or shorter than others. So it's kind of up in the air. It's hard to give a definitive number, but it would, the sooner the better.
Totally. You want to get people treatment faster.
This problem is too big to wait.
Totally. Is this a de novo? TBD. Because we talked about BraveMind, so I imagine it's possible that something similar has been pushed through before.
There are immersive therapeutics out there, none specifically indicated for substance use. And so there's challenges there. There are digital therapeutics for substance use. There are mobile apps and whatnot, but they're different mechanism of action. It's a different physical device that it's delivered on. It's just a different therapeutic altogether. And so, there's similarities and there's differences, and it's a line that's yet to be determined.
Okay. If it is de novo, would that lengthen the reviews?
Maybe a little bit, but I don't think it's drastic.
Okay. Nice. You're working on obviously a very impactful idea and are passionate and interested about it. For anybody who wants to start a business, what would you recommend?
I mean, you answered it in your question. It's like solve a problem that you actually care about, because entrepreneurship is too hard to do if you don't care. You're just like you're not going to be able to stick through long enough, and you're going to give up. At least for most people, if you solve a problem you really care about, I think a good exercise when you're thinking about an idea is like, would I work on this for the next 10 years of my life if it never worked out? And if the answer is yes, it's probably something you should pursue. And if the answer is no, maybe think about it.
Right. So you would work on Relate XR for the next 10 years of your life. I want to start this trend that I saw on Diary of a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trend of leaving a question for the next guest. So I'm going to have another entrepreneur on. What question do you want to ask them?
What's the most controversial thing you believe about entrepreneurship?
Thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. I appreciate having you on.
Thanks, Jasper.